Hello, and we are back for the opening research. Lately, more and more frequently we see accelerated Draken played for black. And that's the opening I've been suggesting for a number of years now. And there is a reason for it. And actually, interestingly enough, there are many hours been dedicated by me and newly born Grandmaster Larry Kaufman using latest version of Ripka and analyze the various position of accelerated Draken up to a total exhaustion of the variations. And the conclusion that was made that in accelerated Draken, white, who is entitled of some opening advantage, would get in some variations insignificant, and in most variations almost no advantage at all. Well, not to mention that white has to be also accurate not to get little or great disadvantage. So, keeping this in mind, I decided to make another video on accelerated Draken. I already have done it in past, but this time I want to give you fuller version, updated version, and I was thinking of maybe doing just updates on that, but then you're going to need to get the previous DVD and kind of integrate two of them together. So I decided to make full DVD on accelerated Draken, excluding on this DVD, excluding Marotse Bind, which will be part separate DVD following this one. So when we play accelerated Draken, we have to play it. There is one danger in accelerated Draken. We are required to play it precisely up to the point where we have some choices. So let's start e4, c5, knight f3, and here black has two different ways to get to accelerated Draken. One is knight c6, and the other is g6. Well, difference between these two continuations only that knight c6 allows bishop b5, and g6 move allows c3, or even d4, c takes d, queen takes d4. So I don't want to go through all these variations, through these differences, because that's gonna take quite a bit of time. But what I would do is I would recommend you, after knight c6, bishop b5, get a database research and see what's the best way to play, because I don't really want to dedicate much time to it. And same thing what happens if you go g6 and white goes c3 or d4 followed by queen takes d4. So let's get directly to the accelerated Draken position, which is after cd, knight takes d4, pawn g6. Now here white has a first choice. I've seen some people, but no one on really high level, play in this position knight to c6. Notice that normal move is knight c3 or c4. But c4 we're going to analyze on a separate DVD. This is Maróczy bind, and I want to attract your attention to knight c3. After knight c3, bishop g7 and bishop e3. Now, this position we can get if white plays knight c3 first. But what if they go bishop e3 first? Do we still play bishop g7 and knight c3? No, I would suggest in this position go knight f6 first. And the reason is very, very practical. Because by playing bishop g7, we are giving white an option to go to regular accelerated Draken, which is okay with us, or white can go c4 and go to Maróczy bind. And at the same time, when we play knight f6, we don't give white a chance to go to Maróczy bind because e4 pawn is hanging, and white also does not have an option of taking on c6 and going e5 because of queen a5 check, winning e5 pawn. So keeping this in mind, white has to play knight c3 since Maróczy bind is not possible. But even if white plays f3, Maróczy bind is not possible because after queen b6, white is in some trouble because of the b2 pawn. So the correct answer here is knight c3 and bishop g7. So either way, whichever order white plays knight c3 or bishop c3, we get this position, which is the key position and the start position of main variations of accelerated Draken. So here white has whole bunch of choices. Bishop c4 is the main move in this position, but before we get to the main move, we want to cover all other continuations. There is a move f3, there is move queen d2, there is move bishop e2, and there is continuations that was very popular for a number of years. Knight takes c6, pawn takes, and e5. Well, we don't have to keep certain order in which we're going to analyze these continuations. So let's start with knight takes c6, pawn takes c6. Well, this exchange wouldn't make any sense for white unless they go e5. And there is knight d5 move for black, which I don't necessarily dislike. I was played it for a number of years, but what move I like better is knight g8. And white has practically two moves here to protect the pawn, f4 and bishop d4. I think in both cases, black has very satisfactory position. On bishop d4, we can go f6, and after ef, knight takes f6, castling. And I want to make a point not to analyze the side variations, ones that don't happen very frequently. I don't want to analyze them thoroughly because that will take time away from the most critical key variations. And after knight g8, bishop d4, as I mentioned already, and actually on bishop d4 there is also c5 move, giving c5 pawn away and taking e5 pawn. But on f4, the move is knight h6, and now best way to play for white is to castle queen side. So queen d2, black castles, white castles, and black goes d6. This is a temporary pawn sacrifice. Of course, accepting this pawn will not promise white any advantage, and maybe even less, maybe it's even disadvantage. Queen takes, rook takes, followed by knight f5, and on rook d3 there is also bishop a6 move. So you can't really seriously accept this pawn sacrifice for white. So in this position, what white should do, they play mostly bishop c4. Either bishop, but on bishop c4 we can go d5. So the other continuation is e takes d, e takes d, and now bishop c4. The idea is on d5 to play bishop b3, have their king safe, and slowly start attacking on the king side. Well, this position I would like knight f5 move, and after bishop f2, c5. This is a very interesting continuation. So black is trying to put the knight on d4 and get very good position. Actually, I have not seen this played like this with a c5 move, but I do like it very much, because if bishop takes c5, white does win a pawn, but I like the position black gets for this pawn. But taking on c5 is almost necessary in this position, because after knight d4, bishop f5, and queen b6, black may have very significant threats on the queen side. After bishop takes c5, go queen c7, and you see that both white bishops are in jeopardy. So bishop d5 is absolute necessity here, and we simply play rook to b8. Now dark square bishop is hanging, bishop a3, and what happens here, black is a pawn down, but in my opinion they have very significant compensation for a pawn. Move I like bishop b7 here, and bringing rook to c8. We have most of the pieces concentrated on white's queen side. If bishop takes b7, for example, queen takes b7, and on g4, we can go rook f to c8. threatening bishop takes c3, black has very strong position. And this is quite satisfactory for black. So now, going back, as I said, I give information on every variation for that white might choose, but we don't want to get to spend too much time analyzing these variations. So going back to the critical position where white has choices, we go e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, cd, knight takes d4. So in this position, we just looked at knight takes c6 continuation. And this information you just got from this DVD is good enough to play it. And if you think that there's some side variations are not covered, you can pick them up in any opening manual that analyzed accelerated Draken at all. There will be a waste of time for us to dedicate much of the time we have for more important variations. So we just looked at knight takes c6. So besides the main bishop c4 move, let's look at bishop e2 continuation. Bishop e2 continuation is absolutely harmless for black. What black should do is simply castle, and if white castles, black has two choices. They can go d5, which gives them almost equal position, actually equal position. If black takes e takes d, knight takes d5, and knight takes c6, b takes c, white has absolutely no advantage. Bishop d4, the knight takes c3 can be played. Those are harmless continuations, and if white is going to try to get an advantage by playing e takes d, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, this is not going to be much either, because we can simply play knight takes d4. And you see knight takes e7 check now loses a piece, because we take on e7, and after bishop takes d4, black simply takes on d4, and bishop on e2 is loose. So this cannot be played by white, and therefore there is only one endgame left that we should briefly take a look at. In my opinion, is absolutely equal endgame. Queen takes d5, bishop takes g7, queen takes d1, any rook takes d1, doesn't matter, king takes g7. Position is absolutely equal, because bishop f3, black simply can play bishop f5 or bishop e6. Since on bishop takes b7 we have rook b8, and then black can play rook c8 and rook c7. Position is absolutely equal. So this is one way to play, and the other way to play actually is more important, because in the key position here where white plays castle, they can play knight b3 first, and we're going to have to play d6. So if we castle and we go d6 instead of d5, and white goes knight b3, we get identical position. And that's the key position to analyze. But before we get to it, I have to point some interesting complications that may occur if in this position, we chose to go d6, we don't want to go to endgame, and this is my personal choice, even though d5, in my opinion, equalizes the game. After d6, f4. This variation favors black. Favors black not in the way that black gets big advantage, no. But black gets at least total equality and maybe even a slight advantage. And the move is queen to b6. That creates two powerful threats. One is simply queen takes b2. And the other, knight takes d4, attacking d4 knight. Well, actually, you have to notice that we are in one variation that merges Draken with accelerated Draken. Because in most of the cases, once d6 is played, it's not accelerated Draken. But we have to know this variation anyway. It's not accelerated, but the accelerated Draken, when you develop the bishop on g7 very quickly, and in most of the cases, you have an option to play d5. But once you play d6, like 90% of the time, it transposes to the regular Draken. But anyway, after queen b6, the best way for white to play is knight a4, and after queen a5, knight c3, hoping black will repeat position. Of course, we don't have to go queen back. We can just play bishop d7 and play a long, interesting game. But why does white have to play knight a4? As I mentioned, knight takes e4 is a serious threat. Suppose white tries to undermine this threat, going queen to d3. Queen d2 will be met by knight takes e4 with big advantage for black, but queen d3 does not allow knight takes e4. So it's black's move. Black can go knight g4. And now, if bishop takes on g4, white has two moves. Bishop takes g4 and knight d5. If bishop takes g4, then we play simply bishop takes d4, which guarantees us a slight advantage for black. Because after bishop takes d4, we take on d4 with the queen, and after exchange of queens, you see the c2 pawn is hanging. If white goes bishop d1, we can simply go bishop d7 or bishop e6, and you can tell we are very comfortable here. And after bishop takes c8, it's the same. We can take with this rook or with f rook, and after rook f2, maybe go b5 or simply king f8, rook c7. Black is very comfortable here. But white may try some very ambitious move and the wrong move in this position. After knight g4, they may try knight d5. And this may mean trouble for white. Because what we do here, we play bishop takes d4, sacrificing our queen. And after knight takes queen, black's position is nearly winning. After bishop takes e3 check, king h1, and bishop takes b6. Now let's assess this position. Black is threatening knight f2, maybe knight e3, and if white takes on g4, we take. Three minor pieces versus queen. This is overwhelmingly good for black, because three minor pieces in big majority of the times are stronger than queen. But in this position particularly, white may try to win black's lone bishop on g4, but it's not going to work because the correct move is bishop h5. That's a very strong move that saves the piece and gives black a big advantage. Not g takes f, e takes f, and bishop h5, because then white has g4 move, and after bishop takes g4, queen g3, winning the bishop. So we have to play bishop h5 right away, because now g4 is not going to work, because white simply takes on g4 and retreats back. And after bishop h5, black simply, white may try h3, but we played gf, ef, and f6. So we have retreating square for a bishop, and position is absolutely, totally lost for white. Imagine, picture what may happen with this position, that black's knight is going to go to e5. It's not something white can do anything about. Bishop to e8, bishop to c6, and rook on g8. It sounds like fantasy, but it's not. It's very easily doable, and that will give black absolutely winning position and total domination on a king's side, with overwhelming power aiming on a white's king. So this is not a good way to play for white. So arriving to the critical position, here is the position where white goes f4. We just said here white has to go knight b3, and for this matter I have to tell you that in this position, instead of castling, white could go knight b3, forcing us to go d6 and then castle. So this is one of the positions of a regular Draken, but that's not variation of regular Draken that may give white any advantage. Now, we have to analyze this position a little further to see how to play, although it's regular Draken position, but if we play accelerated Draken, we may arrive here. So this, we don't have to know all Draken variations, but this one we have to know. My personal choice is bishop e6, and after f4, queen c8. Now, idea of queen c8, maybe we want to go knight g4, or even bishop g4, exchanging some pieces, minor pieces, because it's a known fact. When one side has space disadvantage, and I mentioned it analyzing various different openings. When one side has space disadvantage, it's good to exchange some pieces. So also Queen C8 stops White's F5. So Queen C8 is a good move. So Black may fight against Knight G4 or Bishop G4 by playing King H1, because now Knight G4 will make no sense. Black will go Rook D8, trying for D5, and Bishop F3. Now, one of the well-analyzed moves in theory is D5, which I seriously dislike. I seriously dislike this move because after E takes D, you see we don't have enough hits on D5, but Knight B4 looks like we can get the pawn on D5. But this position is not something I would like to play, because White has very powerful queen sacrifice. Rook takes D1, E takes F, King takes F7, Rook A takes D1. White has a rook, bishop, and a pawn for a queen, and Black's position is very dangerous. Queen doesn't have any good squares to go to. And I don't want to really go into analysis of this position, but take my word, this position is not very good for White, for Black. So we don't want to do this. So in a position, in position where we have a chance to go D5, here is the position where we can go D5. We don't do that. We go Bishop C4 instead, attacking Rook. Rook F2 is the best square. And now E5. We start operations in the center. And this gives Black a good position. Rook D2. E takes F. Bishop takes F4. Knight E5, giving Black very good position, because taking on E5 simply will give Black two bishops and a solid advantage. And the only way White can try for some advantage is to win a pawn. White does win a pawn, but Black has very, very good position and great compensation for it. Simply Rook takes Rook, Queen takes, Knight takes F3, Pawn takes F3, and Queen H3. Now, here is the position where White has an extra pawn. They are not behind in development, but the problem is only their king is a little vulnerable. So there is pawn hanging on F3, and after Bishop G3, very strong move, Knight H5. It's a very strong move because it contains very powerful threat. And powerful threat is Bishop F8. And as you can see, White's queen cannot hold the G3 bishop anymore, because on Queen C7 there will be Rook C8. You see, great coordination of Black's pieces gives them winning position, and on Queen E5 F6. And White's queen is running out of squares. So this is very good position for Black after Queen H3, and whole variation does not give white much advantage. Now, quick summary here. What we are playing in a position after knight b3. A quick summary here that we go d6 and castle, we go bishop e6, and on f4 we go queen c8, stopping f5, preparing rook d8, and on king h1, h3 for this in this case can be even worse than king h1, because then in variation queen h3 we can also take the pawn. So, and here on king h1 rook d8. Now we want to go d5. For example, if queen d2 we can go d5, and on e5 knight e4, having very satisfactory position. And if bishop f3, then we go bishop c4 and start operations in the center, giving black very, very satisfactory position. So we covered bishop e2 in this position, and now outside of main bishop c4 move, we have two other continuations, maybe queen d2 and f3. Queen d2, obviously if you played queen d2, that means you have intention of castling long side. But when black castles, you see that it's not so easy to castle for white long side without any damages. For example, if white castles right away, then knight g4, attacking e3 bishop. Actually, we could have played knight g4 even moved earlier, but let's look at this case. There's no need. I like the castle move, and when white castles, then knight g4. But because now bishop cannot move because we're going to take d4 knight, and if white allows knight takes e3, then bishop on g7 is going to be extremely powerful without opposing dark square bishops by white. So if knight takes c6, b takes c, and this position is extremely bad for black. Well, there may be played bishop d4 or bishop f4. And on bishop d4, black can simply go bishop h6 and get the dark square bishop anyway, because bishop e3 has to be played, since f4 loses immediately to move like e5. And if white happens to play bishop to f4, then black's bishop becomes very powerful after queen a5 and possible d6 and rook b8. Black has overwhelming position. So it's queen d2 is not a very good choice. As we mentioned, once more we castle, and we have knight g4 in mind. And now to stop knight g4, white has to play bishop e2 or f3. And bishop e2, on both of these cases, black responds with a typical accelerated dragon move, d5. And now white really faces serious problems. Now if e takes d, knight takes d5, and now on knight takes d5, there will be knight takes d4, and I think white has quite a bit of problems here, because knight takes e7, white may win a pawn and have very, very bad position, because queen takes e7, and on bishop takes d4, we simply exchange bishops and have a very strong initiative after bishop f5. It's difficult for for a white to castle, and both rooks will come to the game. White has bad position, and if black doesn't go for it, and in this position they simply don't play knight e7 but bishop takes d4, then we can go queen takes d5, and on bishop takes g7, well, actually this position can be played, it can be played as an equal endgame, and also after knight takes d4, this is the position. Queen is on d2. On bishop takes d4, we play queen takes d5, and you see bishop is hanging, and after bishop takes g7, we have in between move, queen takes g2, giving black an extra pawn. So white has serious problems here. So that's why queen d2 is not the move we have to worry about. Actually, you shouldn't look at accelerated Draken the way that, like, what moves are we gonna worry about and what moves we're not gonna worry about. If white plays some move that is not considered one of the best moves, you should look not how I conclude development, but how I can take advantage of it. And queen d2 is one of those moves. Now, after we castle, we have dual threat. We have d5 and knight g4. And white has some problems. The other thing is, what if white goes f3? White still tries to castle queen side. Now, to deal with it, we have to know, any accelerated Draken player has to know, what is the purpose of playing accelerated Draken rather than a regular Draken. There is one big difference between them. When you play with black accelerated Draken, that means you doesn't want white to castle on a long side and have Yugoslavian type of attack like this. And white will not successfully castle on a queen side if you play accelerated Draken for black correctly. And let's look why. Suppose white goes f3. All they want to do, queen d2 and castle. We will prevent this. On f3, we simply castle. Now, if white goes queen d2, we will go d5. We open position in its center, and we're going to have very, very good game. Preventing c5 by playing bishop c4 is not going to do much for white because of queen b6 move. See the same move. It looks like it's dangerous to put queen on the same diagonal with white's bishop, but we are threatening common knight takes c4 for this type of position, and queen takes b2. They are both serious concerns for white. So, and then the only move that makes sense in this position for white is to play bishop b3. Allowing knight takes c4, because there is no other continuation that is nearly satisfactory for white. Bishop b3, knight takes c4. This is all theory, and knight to d5. You see now queen is hanging and knight is hanging. We go queen a5 check, and after c3 we have this knight hanging on e4, and white is going to get the pawn back, and I would consider this game, this position, approximately equal. So I would go knight f6, although knight c5 is also an option. Knight f6, knight takes c6, and I like b takes c, as d takes c also an option and also about equal position. Knight takes e7, king h8, and after knight takes c8, material is equal, although we don't take here on c8. I think little better move may be rook e8 in this position, forcing some kind of move like king f2, and also we can take on c8. But my personal preference here is to take on c6 with the b pawn, and after knight takes e7, king h8, knight takes c8, rook takes, playing d5. This is about equal position, very dynamic, and I wouldn't mind at all playing this position for black. So let's go back to the position and let's talk again about choices white may have in a critical position of accelerated Draken. Here is the key position, and white has, we already mentioned queen d2, we already mentioned bishop e2, and we just mentioned the f3 continuation. So that leaves main move, bishop c4. And on bishop c4, what white wants to do now, if black castles, they want to go bishop b3, followed by f3 and queen d2 and castling long. So that's something we don't want to allow. Now, we play in this position queen a5, obviously not allowing white to go queen d2, which is going to lose some material because knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and knight takes e4, simply wins a pawn for black. After knight takes e4, we will take the queen, and then we will take the bishop. And we're going to have an extra pawn for nothing. So there are two ways to play. If white wants to castle short, they should do it right now. If white wants to castle long, then they will have to try f3 to protect the e4 pawn, since queen d3 is not a good option. And after f3, black has some advantage, playing queen b4. This is a very tactical line that is well analyzed and favors black. Black is attacking bishop on c4, pawn on b2. After bishop b3, knight takes c4. I don't want to dedicate too much time to this because it's all very well known in a theory, because now knight on d4 is hanging, knight takes c6. Now what we play is bishop takes c3, check, pawn takes, queen takes c3, king e2, and now very powerful move, d takes c. And you see white cannot win black's piece because of bishop g4 check, winning queen, and move like bishop d4 that makes it look like black is losing, because rook is hanging, knight is hanging, and queen is hanging. But e5 solves all black's problems, and black is gonna be material ahead. I just want to point that against me once was played move queen g1, that it looks like dangerous move, was prepared in home analysis, that was years ago, and knight has to go back because white is threatening to win the knight. After bishop d4, queen a5, and queen e3. And now black cannot castle because of queen takes e7, and it's very dangerous for black. On rook e8, bishop takes f7. However, very powerful response by black is c5, attacking the bishop, and if bishop takes f6, black is totally winning after queen a6, followed by queen takes f6. And here white is in bad shape because on bishop takes c5, we go simply bishop e6 and have serious advantage. On bishop takes e6, still the same, queen a6 check, followed by queen takes e6, with solid advantage for black. So in this position, after queen a5, white has to abandon their plan of castling queenside, and they have to castle now kingside. We already mentioned f3 move, and obviously queen d2 runs into very common refutation of knight takes d4, and if bishop takes d4, knight takes e4, winning a pawn, because after knight takes c4, queen takes d2, black picks up the bishop on d4, having an extra pawn in winning position. So in this case, white has no choice but to castle short, and that's what black's goal is, to make them castle short. Now, if somebody attempts move like knight b3, that's a mistake. This is the move that may get white in a quick trouble. After queen b4, white attacks the bishop. what is to do with the bishop? Queen e2 will run into knight takes e4. Queen d3 will run into knight e5. And finally, bishop d3 will run into knight takes e4, and white does not have a compensation for a pawn after bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3, queen takes e4. Black has an extra pawn. So all these variations, once more, they bring us to conclusion that white in this position has to castle short. Then black castles short, and we arrive to the key position, one of the most important positions of accelerated Drucker. And in this position, white has two choices, bishop b3 and knight b3. Now, let's look at them both. There was hardly made any other move, played any other move, so we should concentrate on these two continuations. First, knight b3. We have to play queen c7, and I have to point that queen h5 is not a good idea because of bishop e2, and black's queen on h5 is highly uncomfortable, to say the least. So we go queen c7, and now the point of knight b3 move, bishop g5. Well, there is also, that's the main move. Well, if white plays f4, the possible continuation is d6, and on bishop e2, b6, developing bishop on b7, giving black more flexibility. And on bishop f3, highly recommended by Rybka, and the new move, bishop a6, attacking white's rook, rook f2, and now rook a to d8, knight d5, queen b7. That gives black very comfortable position after c3, e6, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6. Black has very good grip in the center, and after retreating bishop g7 and be playing maybe for d5 or maybe for b5, b4, maybe bishop c4 and d5. White doesn't have a very good plan of attacking here. Well, but that's by far not maybe the best continuation for white. What else can white do? So we just looked at f4 continuation, but bishop g5 is the main continuation in this position. After bishop g5, the best move we have is a6. Well, we want to go b5, and also in some cases we prevent, in a lot of cases actually, knight b5, and I'm going to point it to you a little later. After a6, there are two moves. One is bishop takes f6, and the other is bishop e2. On bishop e2, we can simply go d6, and on bishop takes f6, we take with the pawn. This is the key idea, and actually it's very controversial position, pawn structure. Black has very damaged pawn structure with a weak pawn on d6, but they have potential of f5 getting good piece play with two bishops. This position was thoroughly analyzed by Rybka, and final conclusion is black is doing fine. Well, after EF, why not bishop f6? Because we're going to get the same pawn structure without black having two bishops. So we don't want to do that. That's why, in the view of knight d5 move, we take with a pawn, queen to d2. We go bishop e6, and position analyzed Rybka's conclusion, it's total equality. We're going to go rook a d8, eventually f5. Black has very good dynamic play in this position. So let's go back and look at knight b3, queen c7, and bishop g5 a6. Well, in this position, bishop takes f6 is possible. EF, knight d5, queen d8, and now black wants to go f5, c3, rook e8, queen c2. Now, are those moves for white forced? Absolutely not. But they are the best according to Rybka. So, of course, white can play slightly different, but black's main point and main idea remains the same. Black goes b5, and on bishop d3, rook b8, and on rook f1, simply d6. Position is evaluated by Rybka, and I 100% agree with this evaluation that black's two bishops, potential of opening g7 bishop, and you don't feel the weakness of d6 pawn. You can go bishop e6 followed by f5, or maybe followed by taking and going knight e5 followed by f5. Position, in my opinion, is totally equal. That's what Rybka thinks. But if I had to choose to play one side or another, I would choose black. This is my personal preference. It does not indicate that black has advantage, but it's easier to play for black. You know what you're playing for. So, now let's go back to a position where white has a choice between playing bishop b3 or knight b3. Here is the position, and this is, as we know, the key position of the accelerated Draken. And bishop b3 is the most common move. Knight b3 they played maybe in last several years they started playing. So bishop b3 is the main continuation. Now we go d6 and h3, bishop d7. Here is the key position of the very main variation. Here, after bishop d7, f4. That's the main move. And here comes the reason why I call this version of Accelerated Draken, this DVD, updated version, because previously I suggested queen h5 move, which I don't anymore. As you know, it's not because my analyses were defective, because all modern theory is being updated on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Depends on the variation. And long analysis, they being updated. We didn't have Ripka then. And I spent a lot of time analyzing this position after Queen H5. I came to conclusion that I don't want to play it. We don't want to play Queen H5 continuation. Now, to show you why we don't want to play, I can show you quickly what position Ripka considers is a good advantage for white quickly, but I don't want to go into analyzing that position. I analyzed that position together with Ripka and came to the conclusion that black is not doing well there. That's why I derail from this position, from Queen H5 move to Knight takes D4 move. Now, let's look at Queen H5. What I didn't like about Queen H5, and I suggested it on the previous DVD, is a Queen D3 move. And now we go B5. Knight F, well, actually, Knight F3 move. And on B5, there is A3, A5, Queen D3, B4, Knight E2. Here's the position where we had a flow. The pawn takes A3, and we mentioned here that black is doing well, and black has good compensation for a queen after Knight G3, A takes B, Knight takes H5, B takes A, making queen, Rook takes A1, Knight takes H5, and white plays simply Rook F1 or Rook E1. Originally, I evaluated this position as good for black, who has a rook, knight, and a pawn. And I still think it's okay to play for black, but white has an advantage. Now, to update, when we update this variation, and Ripka proved that it has position is not as good for black as we previously evaluated. That's why I don't want to go into absolute details why and what and spending time on that. So that's why I want to change my suggestion and replace this Queen H5 move with Knight takes D4, Bishop takes D4, and Bishop C6. Well, this position has played many times before. It had mixed results, but with the latest Ripka's evaluation and analysis and full and complete exhaustion of the possibilities here, the conclusion is that black is fine. Well, and after Bishop C6, in this position, white has two choices practically. One is Knight D5, trying to get favorable pawn structure with a weakness on E7. And the second is Queen D3, to wait for that and bring the rook into the game. Now, let's look at Knight D5. The best move on Knight D5 is Rook F2 E8. And now, if white plays F5, which is sensible way to try for attack. Then we play bishop takes d5, e takes d, and go knight to d7. Well, in this position, knight to d7 is c3. Well, and after bishop takes d4, queen takes d4, and queen c5, I like black here. Rybka evaluates this position as approximately equal, but we humans, we know that the weak square, the strong outpost on e5 and control of dark square for black should favor black. So this position is good for white, for black. So the other continuation here with bishop on e3. So if black goes, white goes queen d3. Now on queen d3, here comes the new move that was not played previously that completely equalizes position. Knight h5, bishop takes g7. This is the best continuation for white. King takes g7. Queen e3. And trying to take control of important diagonal, a7 g1, queen e3, rook a d8, rook a d1. And this position is absolutely equal. It may look like white has more space, good potential on the king side attack, but after queen c5, Rybka correctly analyzes, correctly evaluates this position as absolutely equal. Queen takes c5, d takes c, bishop d5, and here white gets favorable pawn structure, but with no queens on the board and with endgame tendencies here, position is absolutely equal. Rook f e1, rook d7. Pawn on e7 is not any weaker than pawn on d5. Rook d7, universal move, protecting e7 pawn, preparing counterattack on d5 pawn. White has absolutely zero advantage. Black, again, is doing very, very fine. Now, let's look at rook e1 variation once more. And the old way of playing this position for white, rook e1, rook a c8 was played always, and now the knight d5 move. Now, purpose of this move to force some kind of a pawn structure where white has the pawn on d5, and this position, this type of position, most of the time are favoring whites, because the e7 weakness, even though bishop on b3 is not bad, is not good, it's protecting d5 pawn and preventing black from playing e6. Those type of positions you should stay away from. Well, let's see how we play here. If this happens, so what should we know about it? A knight d5 move creates threat of knight takes c6, followed by knight takes e7. So what we have to do, we play rook f to e8, And now white has to do something about e4 pawn. They cannot just play f3 and protect this pawn, because first of all, h3, g2, and f3 pawn structure create some dark square weaknesses. And also, black has here immediate way of taking advantage of dubious pawn structure. And black can gain immediately big advantage by playing knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, and now this position is almost lost for white. Reason is knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and queen takes e1. This gives black absolutely winning position. Technically, they have material disadvantage, but practically they are absolutely winning. The white may go queen takes e1, bishop takes d4 check, king h1, bishop takes b2, rook b1 or rook d1, it doesn't really matter. Bishop c3, very important to put bishop on c3, that c pawn cannot move. White goes queen e2 and now b5. This position is absolutely lost for white. Black has a rook, bishop, and a pawn for a queen. But in a view of a5 and a4 threat, white may go a3 then, but bishop on b3 is absolutely dead piece. We can go king g7, h5, and then move bishop to f6, rook on c3. White has absolutely no plan, no hope, no position. This is absolutely lost. So, in the position, in case this happens, and after rook e1, so white has a choice, white has an option to how to protect e4 pawn. They may try knight takes c6 in this position, bishop takes c6, actually black has a knight, bishop takes c6, bishop d2, queen d8, and bishop c3, but that doesn't give them any advantage. Also, the possible continuation here is bishop d2 right away, and on queen c5 or queen d8, knight takes f6, bishop takes f6, and bishop c3. This position is also very good for black. Actually, move I like the best here is knight a5, eliminating light square bishop eventually and going a6. Black has no weaknesses, black has two bishops, and very fine position without any worries at all. Now, one last thing that I want to mention in this updated version of Accelerated Draken is this. Well, when you start the game, what is the recommendation? What would I recommend on move 2? The way you go between g6 and knight c6, I want to repeat once more. g6 allows c3 and d4, cd, knight take, queen takes d4, and knight c6 allows bishop b5. Now, how should we go with that? What is preference? The way you look at it is this. Look at G6 variations. Look at Queen takes D4, which, in my opinion, gives white absolutely no advantage. And I can show you briefly. Well, we're going to go knight f6, and well, there are moves like bishop b5, a6, and e5. In which case we go a6, and on e5 we take. And when white takes, we go knight c6. This is very good position for black, and that's what happened against me a few times. Queen takes e7, queen e3, and very strong move b4, taking c3 square away from white's knight. And black has absolutely great position after castling. Queen takes, bishop g7, and after c3, if we castle or we go d5, we can only talk about advantage for black. There is absolutely nothing that white can look forward to. So, in case you play g6, here is what I would recommend. In case you play g6 on a second move, and this happens with you, so on bishop b5, that's what I want to play, a6, but the main move here is e5, and after knight c6, queen just goes to f4 or a4, with the idea of returning to e4 after knight d5. What I would recommend here, after e5 and queen goes away, we go knight d5 and queen e4. Do not play knight b4. That's one of the possible options. Do not play knight c7. Play knight b6. Knight b4, bishop b5 creates some problems for black because there is no d5 because of queen takes b4. So the best continuation after queen f4, and also notice that queen h4 is not possible because knight takes e5 simply wins a pawn. So going to queen f4, knight d5, queen e4, knight b6 gives black, in my opinion, very, very good position. So knight b6, we want to go d5, and make sure you do play d5 as early as you can. Well, d5 here, for example, is looks very good. On ed, queen takes d6, or bishop f4 here will be met also with d5, and if pawn takes, then bishop f5, and if pawn takes on e7, bishop takes e7. You see, we lost a pawn. We didn't really lose, we sacrificed the pawn, and we have tremendous advantage in development. This is the suggestion what we should do if you chose to play g6 on the second move and white decides to play queen takes d4 variation. And also on c3 you can go bishop g7, d4, cd, cd, d5. That will give black fairly good game. Well, that does not mean that I am clearly suggesting to play g6 on the second move. It's just what I choose. It does not necessarily mean that g6 is a better move than knight c6 if you want to play accelerated dragon, but knight c6 you can face bishop b5, in which case black is also okay. You know, there are many different continuations, and main continuation is e6, knight e7, knight g6. Well, you can prepare for that variation also with black. It's not something I can suggest for black, something on my own. If I played on a second move, knight c6 here, after bishop b5, I should go for advice to some publications and some modern theory. I just told you some things about g6 and some things about knight c6. What's the difference in them before we arrive to classical accelerated dragon position? One other thing, g6, d4, cd, knight takes d4, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7. Here is knight d4 to e2 move. Now, this move we can get no matter which move order we chose. So what is the point of this move? The point of this move is to play g3 and bishop g2. Well, what do we do here? If they play this against us, I would recommend to go b5. Now, I will actually knight f6 and to go for b5. This position is not bad for black. There's several ways to play. On bishop g2, we can go rook b8 and b5. We can play castle and go d6, and after castling, play for a6, rook b8, b5. Here, you can choose practically any continuation you like. So, what you have to do, I don't have any personal suggestions, but logically, if we look at this position, and white plays knight d4 to e2, this always means they totally give up on initiative, on opening advantage, and they are not ambitious at all. Now, that does not mean that we have to take advantage of it. No, we cannot take advantage of knight e2 because white is going to develop quick. We have to have some constructive plan and choose. There is a number of different ways to play this position, and you can choose one of them. And there's plenty of information in databases, in opening books, how to play this position. It's not a problem. And the last thing I want to mention, in bishop e3 and knight f6 variation, when this happens, and if white plays bishop c4, and on queen a5, castle, and when we castle, they may come up with a move like f4. Now, how do we deal with it? Is this a dangerous move? No, absolutely, it's not a dangerous move, and it cannot be a dangerous move. So we can go immediately knight g4, but there is also queen c5 move, and on bishop b3, knight takes c4. So this is not good move. So if you, rather than face move like f4, or move like queen d2, or move like rook e1, without h3. Rather than face this in the game unexpectedly and spending a lot of time on your clock, I think you should be ready for them before the game, which means we cannot cover now any and every silly move white can have. So you should go through this. That will help you two different ways. First of all, you will be prepared for that move and you will feel more comfortable. If it happens, you know what to do. And secondly, it will develop your feel for position, and in general, you're gonna be more comfortable with accelerated Draken once you know you looked at a lot of different possibilities and you know what black's intentions are. So accelerated Draken, in my opinion, one of the main challenges white has playing e4, and I would strongly recommend, and I did this for years, I would strongly recommend to play it. And as I said, I spend countless hours together with Ripka trying to find something for white, and white does not have any big advantage. Now, I also want to tell you something about this position. Queen a5 is the main variation we are talking about. But there is also castling. It's another wave. Bishop b3 and a5. This is very popular variation that was very well analyzed, and the conclusion was white is better. Now, having Ripka analyzing this for tens of hours, this position, this evaluation of this position is completely doubtful. Evaluation that white is better, very, very doubtful. After castle, we go a4, and what is normally known as better for white, it's not. White has minuscule advantage and maybe no advantage at all. But this obviously is a huge subject, and we're not going to discuss it now. Only reason why I brought it up is just to tell you how rich are the possibilities for black in accelerated Draken. And in one of my future tapes, DVDs, I do intend to cover a5 and another way of playing accelerated Draken. And I am very, very hopeful for this continuation. But for now, Queen a5, we cannot find any good way for white to get serious advantage. So we are sticking with Queen a5, but expect very soon pawn a5 move. Well, actually castling for white, and after bishop b3, pawn a5 move. This is very serious continuation for white. Actually, in my book about the openings explained, chess openings for black explained, we do recommend a5 move, but analysis, that was before we used Ripka for analysis. But countless analysis with Ripka they confirmed that a5 continuation is very serious, and white has to think over what to do after a5 in this position. So for now, we're going to leave it at that. And I would recommend you to study Accelerated Dragon because you'll learn a lot about strategy, about tactics, and I think it's very lively, opening, and I would recommend you to have in your weapons, in your arsenal of weapons. Okay, thank you very much, and good luck with Accelerated Dragon.